Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for attending the webinar. My name is Tiyana Glenn, Project Manager on our Outreach and Innovation team here at the Afterschool Alliance, and I help coordinate the administration of the NYLF Foundation's Aim High Grant program along with a few other members of our team. Next slide. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Please enter any questions you have throughout today's webinar in the Q&A box. We know that many of you will have questions during the limited time that we have together today, so the FAQ section of the RFP will be updated with any unanswered questions. This webinar will be recorded and the link will be sent to your email and will also be made available on our website and a YouTube channel. Our current Zoom platform only allows for 500 attendees, so if you have any colleagues who are unable to join the webinar via Zoom, they can attend our live stream of the event and the link will be put in the chat. And the last housekeeping note to note is to please change your chat settings to make sure that all your chats go to all panelists and attendees. Next slide. Today's webinar, we will feature two other speakers outside of myself. We will be joined by Marlyn Torres, Senior Program Officer for the NYLF Foundation, who leads the charge on Aim High. And then for our Q&A section today, my colleague Dan Gilbert, Director of Whole Child Initiatives at the Afterschool Alliance, will be our moderator as we answer questions from the audience. Next slide. So here's our agenda for today's webinar. Marlyn will be starting us off with a quick overview of the Aim High Grant Program, its goals, and how it fits in the NYLF Foundation's other investments in out-of-school time programming. I will bit off of this with some few other notes and reminders, and then we'll be moving on to our top tips for prospective applicants to the Aim High Grant Program. Then I will quickly go over the most common questions that we receive from prospective applicants and give some general feedback from our experience with managing previous rounds of the Aim High Grant Program. Lastly, I will give a couple final notes and reminders for applicants, and then we will open up the floor for your questions. As I mentioned earlier, the question and answer portion of our webinar will be managed through our Q&A box. So we'll do our best to get through as many questions as we can. If you still have any outstanding questions after the webinar ends, you can feel free to email us at aimhigh@afterschoolalliance.org, which will be placed in our chat as well. Next slide. And with that, I will be passing it over to Marlyn to give us a big picture view of the Aim High Grant Program.
Thank you so much, Tiyana. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, I'm so excited and happy to be with you all here on this webinar to share more information about our Aim High RFP program, RFP grant program. So the Aim High grant program specifically supports after-school and summer learning programs with a specific and intentional focus on supporting those programs that help middle school students make that critical transition from middle school to high school. We'll go into more in-depth regarding the specific categories, but as a quick synopsis, we'll be awarding 40 grants totaling $1.8 million. We'll be awarding 20 grants in our 2-year grant category, 20 one-year grants. And within that 1-year grant category, that has 2 prongs. The first will focus on supporting organizations in their efforts to advance racial and social justice efforts in their communities. And the second area of focus is the youth entrepreneurship focus, which is a new focus for us this year. And the reason why we focus on after school and summer programs, and particularly trying to provide our help and support to underserved communities, is that research has shown, an overwhelming body of research has shown, that for disadvantaged students in particular, more time in high quality after school and summer programs really complements what they learn during the school day and school year, and it leads to greater academic achievement as well as better social skills and more engaged students overall. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there is a specific and intentional focus on middle school and out-of-school time programs, those after-school and summer learning programs. And again, I'd like to call your attention to the reason why we decided to focus in this area, and that stems from the research that points to students who get to 9th grade, so they complete 9th grade on time and on track, are 4 times more likely to graduate from high school and go on to post-secondary success. So this is a very compelling research data point for us. And that's why we decided to focus and channel our support in this specific way. We've been involved for a number of years. So for the past 11 years, we've had this intentional focus and priority area within our education grants focus. And since that time, we've given away close to $70 million to support these efforts across the country. Next slide, please. So the New York Life Foundation has a two-pronged approach to their grant making. One is our national grant making, which focuses on supporting nationally based organizations that have a broad footprint in multiple cities. We try to balance that out with our local grants strategy, and that's where our Aim High program falls under. So under our local Aim High RFP program, we focus on, it's an open call for proposal from organizations across the country. And that's one way that we try to balance our grant making approach, to have both a national and a local focus to do our grant making and get the much needed resources out there to the communities that need us, that need our support. So the Aim High program really builds off and is modeled off of our national grants strategy, as I just mentioned. And we look at certain indicators of success. One is academic success. And as you can see, there are several others that we focus on: student engagement, attendance, on-time grade promotion, and the development of social and emotional skills. And on this point, I'll pause to say, data is important. So however you measure your program and how you know your program is successful, we want to hear about it. So what makes it successful? How do you measure that? And how do you report on that? So we're interested in learning more about that. Next slide, please.
Yeah, like what you're involved in, if it's like the team grants.
So we're going to go a little bit more in depth on our grant tiers, and just wanted to be able to focus on our one-year grant category. So as you can see, 10 remain focused on racial equity and social justice efforts. And we continue to recognize the important role that after-school and summer learning programs play in supporting marginalized communities and communities of color. And this really reflects our ongoing commitment to support a more equal and just society. In addition, building upon that, we try to be responsive to pressing and priority areas that the field tells us are important or pressing for the field. And what we heard recently was youth entrepreneurship programs are important because of the unique role that they play and how they help young people in unique ways. So 10 of the one-year grants will be focused on supporting programs and their youth entrepreneurship efforts, their programs. And we know that these programs not only are unique in the mindset that they help foster in young people, but one of the main reasons is that once young people learn about entrepreneurship and they develop those important 21st century workplace skills of critical thinking, decision-making, communication, collaboration, persistence, growth mindset, those are very important skills that these programs help build in our young people. That's why this is an important area for us to support this year. So we're eager to see what programs are out there and the good work that you're doing in the community. So with that broad overview, I'd like to turn it back over to Tiyana, who will go over other elements of the program, and then we will answer any questions that you may have. And I'll take the moment to say that once we get to the Q&A, and Tiyana will provide, and team will provide more details on that, we are capturing all the questions if we can't get to them, so we can reflect upon them and respond to them. So thank you so much. Again, thank you for the work that you do in the community, the children that you're serving, and the families that you're helping. So thank you so much for all your hard work. Tiyana?
Thank you so much, Marlyn, for that overview. Next slide. First off, I want to quickly run us through the timeline just to make sure that you all know exactly what to expect when going into the application process. As I'm sure you are all aware, the RFP is currently open and will remain open until 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday, February 1st, 2024. I'm in the wrong year, 2024. The review process will include a diverse set of experts from the out-of-school time field and experts from the youth programmatic strategies. The vetting and review processes for the grant will take place between 3 or 4 months to complete, so you can expect to hear something back from us via email about the status of your application by June of 2024. For grant recipients, there are 2 possible grant periods. The grant period for both of the 2-year grants will begin in June 2024 and end in May of 2026. The grant period for both of the 1-year grants will begin in June of 2024 and end in May of 2025. Grant recipients for all 4 grant categories will be required to submit reports throughout the duration of their grant period. As a new change this year, the 1-year grants will submit 1 final report, and the 2-year grants will submit a progress report and a final report. Next slide. This year's Aim High grant program will include $1.8 million spread across 40 separate grants to out-of-school time programs. This chart can be found on page 5 of the RFP. We have 4 different types of grants. 10 2-year grants of $50,000 per year for a total 2-year grant amount of $100,000. To be eligible for these grants, you must both have an annual organizational budget of more than $500,000 and an annual program budget of at least $250,000. We also have 10 2-year grants for $25,000 per year for a total of 2-year grant amount of $50,000. To be eligible for these grants, you must have an annual organizational budget of at least $250,000. There is no minimum program budget to be eligible for these grants. We have 10 1-year grants for $15,000, which are focused on helping programs improve the supports they provide to youth related to social justice and racial equity efforts. And lastly, we have 10 1-year grants for $15,000, which are focused on helping programs to support entrepreneurship of the youth that they serve. For the purposes of the Aim High grant program, both organizational budget and program budget will be defined by annual expenses rather than revenues. The budget that you should use to meet these eligibility requirements should be from the most recent completed fiscal year. Next, I'm going to quickly run through the eligibility requirements that an organization or program needs to meet in order to be eligible for the grant program. Next slide. First off, all applicants must be registered as 501c3 organizations. Second, applicants must either currently serve middle school age youth or use the Aim High grant funds to begin serving youth in this age range. For the purposes of the Aim High grant program, youth are considered to be middle school age beginning the summer before 6th grade and ending on the first day of 9th grade. Third, applicants must serve low-income youth. In order to be eligible, 75% or more youth served by the applying organization must be eligible for free or reduced price lunch. And then lastly, applicants must not currently receive funding from the New York Life Foundation, either directly or as a pass-through funding from a parent organization. If you have any questions about the eligibility requirements or want to know details about what exceptions may be possible, I will refer you to the Appendix D of the RFP, which provides a FAQ for questions like these. And then if you have any questions that are not addressed in the FAQ or during the Q&A section of the webinar, I again would recommend you to email us. Next slide. Aim High grant funds may be used for either technical assistance, enhancing direct service activities, or both. For the purposes of both of the 2-year grants, technical assistance includes things like program, operations, and governance enhancements. Funds may also be used for enhancing direct service activities, capacity building, and/or program expansion, should a program be in a position to do so. Direct service components include things like expanding program capacity to serve middle school youth, adding a new program component, and enhancing programming to better support students' transition to the 9th grade. I do want to state up front, though, that the Aim High grant funds for all 4 tiers are not to be used to support programming that happens during the traditional school day. Next slide. Like the 2-year grants, the 1-year grant funds may be used for either technical assistance, enhancing direct service activities, or both. The acceptable direct service components are the same as for the 2-year grants, but the 1-year grant funds have a slightly more restrictive usage of technical assistance funds. For the purpose of the 1-year grants, unlike the 2-year grants, technical assistance does not include operations or governance enhancements. For the 10 1-year grants focused on racial equity and social justice, eligible uses of the funds include program enhancements such as supports that help your organization implement practices addressing racial equity and inclusion, program initiatives that engage youth in creating youth-led social justice and civic engagement solutions to local challenges, programming that help youth thrive in the face of trauma related to racial and social injustice and historic disparities, and training for program staff on anti-racism, racial equity, diversity, inclusion, and healing-centered engagement. Next slide. For the 10 1-year grants focused on youth entrepreneurship, eligible uses of the funds include program enhancements such as supports that help your organization address youth entrepreneurship, such as developing a curriculum, partnering with organizations or companies, or job shadowing and field trips. Programming that supports the entrepreneurial mindset, which could involve problem solving, teamwork, ideal pitching, business development, etc. Training for program staff on enhancing and developing the entrepreneurial programming, and efforts that help program assess, develop, gauge, or improve their efforts to support entrepreneurship, such as protocols, procedures, business techniques, and practices. So again, if you have any questions about the eligible use of funding, please feel free to reach out to us and we will attempt to help clarify. Next slide. Now that we've gone through the ins and outs of the grant, we are now going to provide some recommendations and suggestions. The tips, recommendations, and best practices I lay out in this portion of the presentation are drawn largely from the Alliance long history of reviewing application for grants and awards. So here are our top 5 tips for going into the RFP. Next slide.
And Tiyana,
Yes.
before you dive into the top 5, I want to point out and call everyone's attention that this is a highly competitive program. It's not to dissuade anyone. However, it is to really have you submit the best application that you can, the best clear, jargon-free, data-backed application that you can submit for your program. To give an example, so there are 40 programs that we will award this year. Last year, we had 638 applicants for 40 awards. We had over 1,600 people register for this webinar. So this is a very competitive program. So we're providing this guidance so you could be able to put your best foot forward in terms of the program that you're requesting funds for. So I wanted to emphasize that fact. So Tiyana, with that, take us through the top 5.
That was a great way to kick off the top tips. So thank you so much, Marlyn. So the first tip, number 1, all questions have a unique purpose. You should always approach every open-ended question as an opportunity for you to explain and illustrate the value of your program. So we encourage you to make sure that you read fully through the RFP before you start writing any answers to make sure you gain a better understanding of what reviewers will be looking for in each question. When you read through the application in advance, you can see not only the specifics of what each question is asking for, but also how the questions throughout the application fit together to give you a good understanding of how to approach each question. Next slide. Number 2, be an advocate. So it's really vital to give reviewers a complete picture of the great work that your program does. Make sure to share details on how the program is helping to meet the needs of the community, and think of ways to differentiate your program from others. So when available, it can also be a great way to find the best places within your application to demonstrate the program's impact through quantitative and/or qualitative data, but make sure that it is relevant to the question that you're answering. Keep in mind that our reviewers don't just want you to provide a list of program activities and outcome data. It's your job to bring your program to life. So reviewers become more attached to programs that not only provide description of the activities and the data on the program successes, but also give them the information that they need to really understand the day-to-day experiences of the youth that are in your programs. Next slide. Number 3, provide specifics. So details really, really, really matter. We rely on your application to give reviewers a complete and concrete picture of your program. It's also absolutely crucial that you don't assume that the reviewers know anything particular about your program, your curriculum, or even your community. So if you have any great outcomes, data, or strong answers to share within your application, make sure that you are providing this within the application so that way reviewers can rely on you to convey that information in a compelling way that helps them understand the true value that your program brings to your youth and to the community. Next slide. Number 4, keep it relevant. So be clear in your answers and always keep in mind the specific goals and priorities of the RFP and the intent of each question when answering them. So we know it's very tempting to go off tangent and describe like all the great things that your program does and how it impacts the organization and how it impacts the community. But we want to make sure that you are answering the questions and keeping it relevant because the reviewers look at every word as a precious opportunity for you to give them an important information that addresses the question at hand. So not only is it keeping it relevant helpful for you as an applicant answering those questions with the word limits, but it's also helpful for reviewers to easily identify the point you are trying to make when you answer those questions. Next slide. Tip number 5, which I feel like is one of the most important tips. So read, reread, have someone else read, and then read it again. So we all been there when, you finish a job task or application and you click send or submit, and then you immediately notice the typo right after you click that button. So it's really great to review your application multiple times before submitting your answers. It's also really great to have your colleagues check it out or even someone outside of your organization to review your application. A fresh set of eyes is really great for both finding those little errors that drive us all crazy and for finding places where you can fortify your application by providing additional details or context. Another reason for having someone else read your application is to help you avoid jargon. This is something that Marlyn just spoke about. So it's important to make sure that your answers to the questions in the application are clear and concise. And I do want to add something here too, along with jargon, acronyms. I know our field is notorious for having acronyms. So just making sure that you spell out any acronyms within the out-of-school time field. That's why we're making sure we say out of school time instead of OST. So just keep that as an additional tip. Next slide.
Tiyana, to
Yes.
reemphasize that point, in terms of jargon-free language, I bring up the example empowerment, of the word empowerment. Every program uses that. So we empower youth, we empower families. Each program does that in a different way. So that doesn't really tell me or the reader, the reviewer, how do you achieve that? What specifically do you provide to the young people that you serve? And then and what skill does that build? So that's what we mean by jargon-free language. And again, acronyms spell it out in terms of what they mean. You know your programs closely, but the reader, the reviewer doesn't. So wanted to re-emphasize that. And clear language is to be able to describe to any person what your program does that maybe is not even in the youth development field, that they get what you do. So I wanted to emphasize that. So thanks, Tiyana.
No problem. Thank you. So before we move on to the FAQs, I do want to quickly remind and provide an update on how to approach 2 particular questions within the application. So within the RFP and in the application system, we do provide links to the downloadable sample charts and the downloadable template charts for you to reference when it comes to answering both the project expected outcome section and the budget and narrative sections. So the sample charts give you a good idea for how to fill the details of a high quality answer for those sections. And then you will need to upload both of these documents in the application system using the templates provided. But please note that the project expected outcomes chart in section C is only for the 2-year grants, and this chart is no longer required for the 1-year grants. So this is one of the changes that we made for this year. So please note that. Next slide. In this section, Marlyn and I will be quickly going through the answers to the most frequent questions that we receive about the Aim High grant program. For your reference, most of these questions and answers can be found on the Appendix D section on page 49 of the full RFP. Next slide. So top question, how many grants will be given? 10 grants of $50,000 per year for a total of 2-year grant amount of $100,000. 10 grants of $25,000 per year for a total 2-year grant amount of $50,000. 10 one-year grants of $15,000 focused on racial equity and social justice, and 10 one-year grants of $15,000 focused on supporting youth entrepreneurship. Next slide, over to you, Marlyn.
So, can multiple programs or program sites from the same organization submit applications separately? The answer is no. So each organization can only submit one application. However, if an applicant is an affiliate of a national organization, more than one affiliate is able to apply for funding as long as that affiliate is currently not receiving funding from the New York Life Foundation. And if an organization has, if an organization has multiple affiliates or regional entities with distinct EINs, tax identification numbers, one application may be submitted for each EIN. So to follow my own rule, EIN, we needed to spell out that acronym, but that's the tax ID of the nonprofit organization. I was going to say one other item regarding the first bullet point is if you're an affiliate and you're going to apply, you need to ask your national office if your site currently receives funding. So ask your your national office first to verify whether or not you receive funding from New York Life Foundation grant. Tiyana, next slide, and Tiyana.
Thank you, Marlyn. So our next questions. Are organizations with annual budgets of less than $150,000 eligible to apply for any of the grants? Unfortunately, no, they're not. So the minimum organizational budget to be eligible for the grants is $150,000. Are nonprofit organizations that are not 501c3s eligible to apply? Again, unfortunately, no. Only 501c3 organizations are eligible to apply. Next slide.
Is the program budget or the organizational budget that will be needed to meet the budget requirement? So for the 1-year $15,000 grants and the 2-year $50,000 grant, it's the full operating budget from the most recent fiscal year that determines eligibility. For most of the organizations, this will be the final fiscal year 2022 budget. And it depends because everybody has a different fiscal year end. So the point here is your most recent fiscal year end. For the 2-year $100,000 grants, applicants must meet the minimum, the budget minimum for both the organizational budget and the program budget. So I'll refer you back to earlier in the presentation. You saw the slide with the blue, I guess, bubbles that look like a flow chart. Refer to that slide. Everybody's going to get a copy of this link, the recording of today's webinar. Refer to that slide in terms of how the program budget and organizational budget determine which grant category you can apply for. Tiyana? Next slide, and Tiyana.
Thank you. What is the geographic scope of the grant? So anywhere within the 50 states and the District of Columbia, applicants from the U.S. territories are ineligible. So as you can see here on our screen, applicants from these target states will receive a additional 5 extra points. So we have Alaska, Hawaii, Idaho, Maine, Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, North Dakota, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Next slide.
That would be me, okay. Uh, Are schools, school district, colleges, universities, and/or other government entities eligible to apply? No, schools, school district, colleges, and universities are not eligible to apply for the Aim High program. Can 501c3 organizations serve as a fiduciary agent or for programs run by organizations that are not 501c3? Yes, 501c3 organizations may serve as a fiscal sponsor for non-501c3 program providers. To clarify, this means there's some community-based organizations that work through a fiscal sponsor in our efforts to be able to support grassroots and community-based organizations. We allow for the fiscal sponsors. And for the top bullet, the spirit of the reason why schools, school district, colleges, and universities are not eligible to apply is in the spirit of nonprofits and smaller nonprofits have a difficult time finding and applying for public and private funds. So that's another reason why. So I wanted to underscore some of and provide some context there. Next slide and back to Tiyana.
Thank you, Marlyn. And I said that my first question was probably the top question. No, this one right here on the screen is the top question because I still see it popping up as we're talking today. Can I get a recording of this webinar? The answer is yes. This webinar is being recorded and a link will be sent to you via email and it will be posted on the Afterschool Alliance webinars page. Next slide. So here I'm going to give the quick, super quick summary of our feedback from the first few rounds of the Aim High grant. Next slide. First off, and this is something that Marlyn mentioned before, as far as it being a very competitive application process, the first 7 rounds of the Aim High grant program, we were really grateful for the wealth of high quality applications from all over the country. With hundreds of applications submitted in each of the 7 years of the program, we have now given out 212 grants to the out of school time field. So it's important to make sure that you double check everything within your application to make sure that your application is top notch and stands out from the crowd. Next slide. I want to reiterate that the reviewers who will ultimately be reading your application are on your side. If it was up to us here at the Afterschool Alliance, to Marlyn and her colleagues at the foundation, or any member of our review panel, we would love to give each and every one of you all funding to serve the youth in the communities that you're in. The reviewer's job is to narrow the field, and we are not going through and picking out favorites. So we are trying to provide objective scores to each section of the application and weighing them according to a rubric that is aligned with the point values that were provided in the application itself. Your job as the applicant is to both provide answers to each question that address all the different aspects of the questions asked, and also to provide a bigger picture and details throughout the application that give reviewers the information that they need to not only score your application highly, but to also advocate for and promote your application in discussions with other reviewers. Next slide.
And to emphasize the previous slide, I want to be able to point out that since the inception, we've partnered with the Afterschool Alliance because we really draw upon the professional network that the Alliance has in the after-school time field. Also, the reviewers are, sorry, I'm in the office. That's not ambient noise, that's real coworkers. What was I going to say? In terms of the, what was I saying, Tiyana? Sorry.
And you're referencing the last slide where we go over like the job of the reviewers.
Yes.
And how competitive. Yeah.
Thank you. So the review committee, it's made of a selection. There's a review committee that reviews all the applications, and that is made up of a cross section of Alliance staff, youth development fields, past winners of the Aim High program. So we try to make it very diverse and robust. There's like over a dozen reviewers. So I wanted to give people a little insight into that as well. Turn it back over to you.
No problem. Thank you so much. All right. So applicants that did their best typically made a very compelling argument that they were a good fit for the stated objectives of the Aim High grant. Other qualities include applicants that are that specifically address the 8th to 9th grade transition. I can't emphasize this one enough. And then also applicants that focus their answers on the benefits and services provided to middle school age youth, as opposed to elementary or high school students. I do want to note two other things. One, that there is a heavy focus on outcomes data when it comes to the 2-year grant applications. And then two, new or very young programs or those that are just starting off serving middle school youth often have greater challenges standing out. So make sure you keep that in mind when completing your application. But for a full list of characteristics of quality applicants, you can go to page 6 of the RFP. Next slide. And then lastly, the number one reason that applicants lose points in the first round was when their responses to the questions left aspects for those questions unanswered. So while we know it's very tempting to simply run off of plug and play with developmental language, it's very important to take the time to tweak to ensure that it's a good fit for the question at hand. So pay attention to the specific aspects of the question that you need to address. It's fine to include details outside the scope of the question, so long as those details are A, aligned with the question itself, and B, your question also addresses every aspect of the question as it is posed. It's important to recognize that when you omit a response to a particular question, the reviewer has no way of knowing that it is a simple oversight on your part, or if you or your organization generally do not have a good answer to that particular question. So by leaving out those details, you're leaving that determination up to the reviewer. Next slide. So before we dive into the Q&A section of the webinar, I just want to go over and take one last second to highlight the most important things for you to remember as you prepare for your application. Next slide. One is the due date. So applications must be submitted February 1st, 2024 at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just another little tip right here as well, download the application, review the questions, and then draft your answers with time to spare. Make sure that you provide clear answers to the questions. Another reminder, again, make sure that you have data to support the information that you're providing. So the strongest applications often include the robust program data that we mentioned before. And then lastly, don't assume. So reviewers will be unfamiliar with your program, so make sure you provide detailed information that will help the reviewers gain a stronger understanding of the supports your program provides. Next slide. All right, so here we'll be opening up the webinar to your questions. Please note that we will not be addressing questions that are put in the chat box. So if you want us to address a question, please make sure you put it in the Q&A box on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And so at this time, I will be passing it over to my colleague, Dan, to moderate this section of the webinar. Dan.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. Dan Gilbert, Director of Whole Child Initiatives with the Afterschool Alliance, been working on the Aim High program since its inception. So moderate is probably a strong word for what we're going to do here. We're going to try to get through as many of your questions as we can from the question and answer box, not from the chat box, from the question and answer box between now and when we run out of time in about 20 minutes. So Tiyana and I are just going to be running through and trying to tackle things. So Tiyana, feel free to hop into that Q&A box and start scanning for things that you want to answer. So the first thing that I wanted to answer live. So we have a nonprofit that works in pre-K through grade 8 schools. And they asked, are after-school activities eligible for Aim High funding if they are made available to all grade levels, including but not limited to 8th grade? So Aim High grant funds can be used to support programming for 6th through 8th graders. Other kids that are outside of that age range can certainly participate in the programs, but the funds can only be to support young people that are within that age range. Moving along here, the racial equity and social justice component, is it based on who our program targets, or is it to be a built teaching component within the program? So the intention is for it to be it's more about what the program does and what the program is teaching than it is about who the program serves, although both will be considered within the review process. Tiyana, feel free to dive in if you see anything.
Yeah, I have one right here. if summer programs, 8th to 9th grade transition can be funded, are there program requirements for how long the program is? So for example, weeks, days of weeks, hours, and et cetera. So if you go to our page 6 of the RFP, not only do we highlight the top characteristics of past awardees, but we actually have a chart that goes over the median dosage of our past awardees as well. So while we don't have strict requirements that go along with these data points in the question, we do have on average what our typical awardees do as far as like the number of students they serve, the days of operation, hours of operation, and things of that nature. So I would definitely refer you to page 6 of the RFP to further look at that. And I think that came from an anonymous attendee.
Thanks, Tiyana. And again, we don't have requirements, but that'll give you a feeling for what a competitive applicant would look like. So here I have someone representing an out of school time intermediary who is not a direct service provider. So intermediaries, in order to be eligible to apply, an organization has to be a direct service provider. An intermediary can serve as a fiscal agent or can receive limited pass-through funds from an applicant. But in order to be the primary applicant for the Aim High grant program and the organization that receives the funds, if awarded, you need to be a direct service provider.
One question I see here, are startup programs eligible to apply? Yes, you are eligible to apply, but we just want to emphasize that this is a very competitive competition. And as we mentioned before, sometimes our newer or younger programs, they tend to just kind of fall in the weeds of the application. So make sure that if you are a new or young program or a program that maybe been around for a while and just now tapping into the middle school age range, that you find different ways to stand out from the crowd. So short answer, yes, you are eligible to apply if you're a startup program.
Thank you, Tiyana. Next one, will you consider programs that are part of larger organizations with larger budgets? There is no maximum organizational budget. We have seen YMCAs with budgets in the tens of millions. We have seen United Ways with budgets in the tens of millions receive grants. The only thing that I want to qualify here is that the grant program is to not solely, but mostly intended to support kind of smaller programs serving specific populations. So if you have a very large organization that provides out of school time services in a broad geographic area, you'll probably have better luck applying for some specific programs that serve a particular community or a particular population than if you apply for a little bit of money for a bunch of different programs.
I see a question here. I'm trying to see, Dan, if you answered this one already. Are 2-year grant focus areas only racial and social justice and youth entrepreneurship? Have you answered that one?
I have not.
I don't think so. So just to clarify, the racial and social justice and youth entrepreneurship are for our 1-year grant focus area. So we have 2 1-year grant focus. One is for racial social justice, which will be 10 grants. And then the other 1-year focus is for youth entrepreneurship, which is the other 10. So to answer it, maybe, I'm not sure if that was a typo, maybe that was a typo, but I do want to clarify that the grant focus are for the 1-year grants, and we only have 2. So one is for racial and social justice, and the other one is youth entrepreneurship.
Thanks, Tiyana. Yeah, and so those are not foci of the 2-year grants, to be explicit. Here I have a question. Our middle school provided free lunch and breakfast to all students. Consequently, many families didn't fill out the paperwork. And so the school only reports that 51% of students qualify for free or reduced price lunch, but also shares that the number is actually much higher. Does this disqualify us? So this is increasingly a challenge that we're facing. The best answer that I can provide to you, you can find on page 52 of the RFP. It's in the FAQ here, but I'm going to go over it really quickly because we know that a lot of school districts provide free lunch to all young people and don't collect the free and reduced price lunch data. So if a program submits non-free and reduced price lunch data or an estimated free and reduced price lunch rate to establish their eligibility for the grants, you are expected to provide a thorough explanation of the data that you use and your responses within section C, the community demographics and needs. And examples of data sources that have been used by previous grant recipients to estimate their free and reduced price lunch rates include United Way's Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed, or ALICE, measures, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development's income limits data. So we know that some programs don't have access to that. Also, lots of programs only have that information for entire schools, but don't have it for the specific subsection of the school population that they serve. So my case to you is if you're not going to use straightforward free and reduced price lunch rates that you have access to, just be prepared to justify the argument that the population that you serve would meet those needs.
Okay. I'm going to answer two questions that I see right near each other. So to clarify, schools are not eligible to apply, correct? That is correct. Schools are not eligible to apply. And to learn more and read more about that, please see our page 8 of the RFP. Can we go into the details of organizations that are ineligible to apply and kind of provide the explanation as to what you can do if you are noted as ineligible. And then also in years past, there was a specific application for summer programs. Is that still happening? No. So the only two different applications that we have is for the 2-year and for the 1-year grant. So just determining which grant tier you're applying for, but whether you're a summer program or a year-round program, it will be the same application.
Thanks, Tiyana. Did you do both of them? You said you were going to do.
Yes, sorry,
Okay.
there was 2 separate questions.
Okay, great. I have one question that I'm going to punt to Marlyn. So we recently changed it so that universities are ineligible to apply. I do believe that means that university-based foundations are also ineligible to apply. But Marlyn, is that right?
Yes, that's correct, Dan. Your interpretation is correct. So the reason for that is that this, as you mentioned before, the spirit of the RFP is to provide support to locally based organizations. So we felt that a university applicant with a big endowment would not fit the spirit of the RFP. So therefore, universities are not eligible.
Thank you so much, Marlyn. The next question that I had here, so someone was asking about, so just for the 2-year $100,000 or $50,000 per year grants, we have that program budget requirement. We've had a few folks ask about whether it is the cumulative budget of all of your out-of-school time programs, or if it is the program budget for the applying program that would need to meet the $250,000 budget requirement for that. The answer is that is the budget for the applying program or programs. So all applying programs must meet the free and reduced price lunch minimum, and put together the applying programs that would receive the funding if awarded it is the budget of those programs that would be needed to meet that $250,000 minimum.
I see a question here as well, and I think this is something that we have answered before, but Marlyn, I would like for you to elaborate more on this when it comes to faith-based organizations applying, if they're eligible or not.
Faith-based organizations are eligible to apply if they meet the criteria, and we do have a non-discrimination criteria in order to be the recipient if you are selected of our grant funds. So the short answer is yes, if it's a nonprofit that serves the whole community and they sign a non-discrimination clause as a term for receiving the grant funds.
Thank you so much, Marlyn. And we have had faith-based organizations receive grants in the past. So certainly not something that, as long as you're willing to sign that clause, you're certainly still a viable applicant. I will note that many faith-based organizations will have problems with our employer identification number verification system because faith-based organizations are not in the IRS database that our application portal connects to. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any issues with that at aimhigh@afterschoolalliance.org. You see it on the screen here. Here I have a question. Does the grant fund only fund programs for after school and or summer program, not during the school day or on weekends? So we do not fund programming that occurs during the traditional school day. Some grant recipients do program during school breaks. Some do provide programming and have funding from the Aim High grant funds to do programming on weekends. Before school also eligible. So the only thing that is explicitly ineligible is programming that occurs during the traditional school day. You cannot use Aim High funds to support that programming.
I have a question here. Can you apply for both categories? The short answer is no. We would love for you just to choose one grant category that you feel most inclined to, or that you feel like you align with the best to apply.
Thanks, Tiyana. One here, do we need to show that participants move to the next grade level? So you do not need to be able to show already that data, but as part of the requirements for the Aim High grant program, in all of the applications, you'll see that this is actually one of the questions is how will you begin tracking matriculation from 8th to 9th grade? Since obviously that is one of the primary foci of all of the grants under the program. So you do not need to already be tracking your successful 8th to 9th grade graduation rates. You do need to start tracking it if you become an Aim High grantee.
And to emphasize on that point, we want to hear about how you are able to point to the effectiveness of your program in building skills that help young people with that transition to high school. So whatever data points you do have that support that overarching statement, hypothesis of how your organization affects that change, we want to know. So I want to add additional context to what Dan said there.
Thank you so much, Marlyn. Here I have another question. So we have some past grant recipients that have been asking about their eligibility. We have someone asking about continuing funding after. So for the Aim High grant program, if you receive an Aim High grant, once your Aim High grant ends, you will need to wait 2 years before you can receive funding from the Aim High grant program again. So for example, in order to receive the 2024 grants, which will be outlaid in June of 2024, you would need to have had your previous grant end by June of 2022. So you need to wait 2 years. That means that realistically, you're only waiting a year and 8 months before you reapply, but those funds would be outlaid a little bit after that.
And to add to what Dan said, to provide more context. So the Aim High RFP grant program is focused on supporting locally based organizations. However, it's not intended to be long-term support. It's intended to be support that you can leverage. So I say that to add that footnote to that. So keep in mind, if you're a past winner, that's great. And if you meet that hiatus period, you can reapply for funding. But I would say that it is not long-term funding. So it would be important to speak to how you've leveraged past support and speak to the progress of past support. So I would emphasize that point. Back over to Dan and T.
And there is a question in all of the applications that asks about your plans for sustainability beyond the grant period. Tiyana, I saw you unmute yourself.
Yeah, I actually had a question I think will be great for Marlyn to answer since she's on here. Does it help to have a connection with someone at NYLF Foundation?
So to answer that, we certainly try to make connections to the local community with our local offices. So we want to know, but you don't get penalized if you don't have a relationship. And if you do have a relationship, it's helpful to have that on your application and it's noted. However, it's not heavily weighted in the scoring rubric. So don't think that because you don't have a NYLF person on your board or you're connected to one, that it will impede the progress of your application moving through the review process. And at the same time, if you have a local person connected to your organization, that's great. We'd want to know, that'd be helpful. However, you still have to have a pretty solid application and program to be a competitive applicant.
Thank you so much, Marlyn. And to echo what Marlyn is saying, also expand it. So the grant rubric is out of 100 points total. The connection to a New York Life office is 5 out of that 100 points. There's also the target states that Tiyana outlined earlier. Those also receive 5 total points. We received a few questions from folks about if you're not in a target state or if you don't have a connection to a New York Life office, should you bother applying given how competitive the grant program is? I mean, I have nothing better than the data to provide here. Fewer than 10% of grant recipients already have a connection to a New York Life office, although grant recipients are encouraged to develop one. And also fewer than 15% of all applicants are from target states. So the vast majority of applicants who receive grant, the vast majority of grant recipients have neither a connection to a New York Life office already in place, nor are they from target states. So everywhere is a good shot here. Don't consider not having that connection or not being in one of those target states as a reason not to apply.
One question here, if we don't have a financial audit, what do we need to submit? So if you do not have a financial audit to submit, please provide a letter stating that an audit isn't necessary for your organization and put that within your file when you apply. So again, to receive more information or to know more information about that when it comes to like what we are looking for, when it comes to not only the financial audit, but like your 990, page 40 of the RFP goes into more detail of that. And if you have any questions specific to your situation, feel free to email us at aimhigh@afterschoolalliance.org.
Yeah, and to provide additional context on that, if the foundation is concerned about, if you don't have an audit or there are issues with the finances of your organization, before funds are outlaid, the foundation does do vetting. So they may reach out to you with additional questions if you're one of the finalists. Another question here, are local chapters of national organizations ineligible to apply for the program if they share an employer identification number with the respective national chapter? So if you are a chapter of a national organization and you would be using the employer identification number of that national organization to apply, you and other affiliates can apply using the same employer identification number, with the caveat that if your national organization already receives funding from the Aim High, from the New York Life Foundation in any capacity, if any of that funding is passed through to you, you are ineligible to apply because you are already being funded by the foundation. If you don't know whether some of your funding may already be coming from the New York Life Foundation, reach out to your national office and they'll be able to tell you if any of the financial support that they provide to you originates with the foundation.
I have one question here. So on average, how long does it take to complete the application? While I do not have a specific answer to this question, I do want to highlight this year that our team worked really hard to make sure that we reviewed each and every question to streamline to the best of its ability, really based off of our feedback from our reviewers. Our reviewers gave us really good feedback this year. So if you have been a past applicant or even a past awardee and you go into our application system and see the application this year, you will notice that it has changed. So we have did our best to make sure we streamline questions and, you know, really make sure that we are really honing in on the information that's really important to us when we review your application. So with that being said, I do not have a direct answer, but I will hope that, especially compared to years past, that you should be able to efficiently move throughout the application this year.
Thank you, Tiyana. Let's see if we can find one more to get through here before we hit that mark. Unfortunately, due to the volume of applications that we receive, we are unable to provide individualized feedback. We do update the FAQ and update our guidelines and recommendations for applicants every year. We also, based on the feedback that we get from applicants and from our reviewers, modify the application, as Tiyana just mentioned, but we cannot give individualized feedback to every applicant, unfortunately. So sorry about that. And then the last one, and I think then we'll probably have to close us out. Folks are asking about if they are using a fiscal sponsor or fiscal agent. So if your organization already meets the budget requirements and you are a 501c3, then you do not need a fiscal agent. If you are not a 501c3, then you will need to work through a 501c3 fiscal agent. So if a program has a fiscal agent that is not a 501c3 and the program is not a 501c3, you are ineligible to apply. You can certainly look to see if you can find another 501c3 organization within your area that will serve as your sponsor or as your fiscal agent, but you need a 501c3 in order to be eligible. So here we're 2 minutes to the hour, so I'm gonna pass it back to Tiyana to close us out. So thank you all so much.
All right, thank you so much, Dan, for helping us get through the question and answers. Dan is such a great expert when it comes to Aim High. So I tell him he knows like everything when it comes to the specific questions. So we had the right guy on the call with us today. And thank you all so much for dropping in your questions. And I know we didn't get a chance to get through everyone's question. We really tried, and there were a lot of questions. So if we did not get a chance to answer your question, please feel free to email us out with our email address right here, aimhigh@afterschoolalliance.org, especially those questions that are very specific to your program. So that way we can really take time to read through your question and provide you with the best answer possible. So again, I would like to take this moment to thank you all for your time and your interest in applying for the New York Life Foundation's Aim High Grant Program, and that we hope that you found this to be informative, and then we wish you the best of luck with your application. But before we close, Marlyn, just want to pass it over to you if you have any parting words of encouragement or any wisdom for our attendees today.
I echo what you said, Tiyana, in terms of wanting to thank everyone for participating, and I look forward to learning more about the programs in your community. And I had a moment of reflection, and I don't know if you guys remember Hands Across America. So I feel such a connection to all the organizations across the country as I was seeing, where everybody's joining in from. So I think that's great. And I know there's a lot of great programs out there across the country. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Marlyn, and thank you to the New York Life Foundation for this grant program. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you all.